Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, 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 hello. My name is Brian Francis. I am a contributing editor at Gamasutra.com. I am, as always, the invisible voice inside your head. Um, I am here today playing a little game that has a cute dog. I like this dog right here. Hello, dog. It's sleeping. That's a good idea. This game is Battle Chef Brigade. We are playing it on the Nintendo Switch. It just launched a couple weeks ago on Switch and Nintendo Switch and Steam. And in the lower left-hand corner, I have two wonderful faces who have some things to say. Alex, first of the faces. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I have nothing to say other than I'm editor at Gamasutra.com, and I am very happy to be here because we are joined by a very, very special guest. Special guest, could you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Hi everybody, I'm Tom Eastman. I'm the president of Trinket Studios, but since there are only three of us, that really just means I do Twitter and taxes. I'm really a programmer. And yeah, we just finally shipped Battle Chef Brigade after 4.5 years.
Yoo! Congratulations. Battle Chef Brigade, for those of you who are somehow unfamiliar with it, is as we will see in a moment, a combo of a ingredient gathering combo fighting side-scrolling fighting game with a match 3-ish puzzle game, all centered around cooking. It's got some beautiful art, it's got some cool voice acting, which sadly I couldn't get working. Sorry about that. And also it had a pretty successful Kickstarter run, and is one of the first few indie games to kick in the door on the Switch. Yeah, well, Alex, go for it.
Could we start with that Kickstarter? Because, Tom, you just mentioned it's been 4.5 years. But this Kickstarter came out, launched, and successfully funded in 2014. So, how long, how do you trace this game? How far back does it go?
So it was back in 2013. So we can go even further back. We, the three of us, myself, Eric, and Ben, worked at Wide Load Games in Chicago. That was Alex Seropian's second studio after Bungie. And we all went there, and then Disney bought Wide Load, and we stuck it out for 3 years that weren't too creatively fulfilling. And then we made 2 mobile games to be creatively fulfilled, I guess, and then decided to do something larger. And we just hit on the idea of, let's try to make a cooking game about a cooking competition. Mm-hmm. We mixed in the fantasy at some point, but we really wanted to capture the sort of improvisational and creative cooking that you see on Food Network shows like Iron Chef, Master Chef, Chopped, where you're not following recipes, where the chefs aren't following recipes, but you're trying to figure out how to use a theme ingredient, like here, the Karana, to make a delicious dish, and you're really mixing in all the other ingredients and cookware and spells from your pantry to make a delicious dish. So there are fewer constraints, and then it's all about being creative and improvising.
Yeah, unfortunately, Wide Load was shut down in 2014. I wonder, were you guys still there when you were working on this project, or did you?
No, we left after their second to last game, Avengers Initiative Hulk, and then I'm in a co-working space right now with a couple other people who did stick it out to the end.
Yeah, I asked because I think it's interesting to get the story of where Trinket Studios comes from. You know, you guys are based in Chicago, which has a small and vibrant hub of game development. And it's interesting to sort of see what happens to people after sort of bigger studios shut down, the sort of diaspora of indies that spring up around them. It's neat to see Trinket doing so well. But before we get into the game, I kind of want to just real quick ask, what's the game dev scene like out there in Chicago?
It's super awesome. And like you said, there was sort of this diaspora of indies spreading out from bigger studio closures. Sort of the big one was EA Chicago. They did, oh my God. It's like the hip-hop fighting game.
Oh, Def Jam?
Yeah, Def Jam.
Yeah, Def Jam and then Def Jam Icon or something.
Yeah.
So I've only heard tales of how wacky and poorly managed that studio was, but a lot of people left there, and then some of those people ended up at Wide Load, and some ended up all over the country, and then everything just slowly imploded after that. There are a whole bunch of small studios, but all the Wide Load group and a couple other people who ran away from smaller studios formed a pretty solid community here, somewhat centered around DePaul University, which had a really good student game program that produced Octodad by the Young Horses, and not in our co-working space, but 3 doors down in this like commercial, uh, weird suite area.
Yeah.
And so we have like indie lunch every Friday, and we have frequent meetings of all sorts. Like there's Indie City Games at DePaul every other month, and so it turned out to be like sort of a blessing in disguise that a lot of these studios folded, and we were able to just like have a really supportive, vibrant community. And so now here in the Indie City Co-op, there are about 18 people with full-time desks here, and then we have part-time members as well. So we ended up having this like really awesome, supportive community coming out of something that was pretty sad.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder, what do you appreciate running your own studio these days as president and Twitterer? And what do you miss about working in a larger environment with other folks?
Yeah, I've learned to really appreciate some of the larger studio amenities. Like dealing with taxes and payroll is pretty painful. Marketing in the, oh, I'll just like hang out on Twitter sense is pretty fun, and I enjoy that. And none of us were into Twitter before. We were like, okay, I guess we have to do this now that we're indie game developers. And it turned out to be really fun, but we weren't into it before. But then when you get to the end of development, you're like, oh, all this marketing is on us. So that was why we got a publisher. But just like having to deal with a lot more of the realities of trying to make it work when you don't have the money to really make it work has been very different for us. And there are other challenges just having a small team that are hard. Like I'm a programmer, Ben's a programmer, and Eric's an artist, and so we don't really have like a dedicated designer. So we just had to sort of figure it out as we went along, and that's part of why the game took a long time. Is that we had to really prototype. For instance, the cooking mechanics, we had to like really try things because we didn't really know how to prototype well.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to come back to that decision to get a publisher, but let's dig into the game itself, since Brian has been so dedicated to making the perfect dish here behind us. And I encourage anyone in chat who has questions about the game's design or development to sort of just throw them out, and we'll get to them as we can. So, you had to prototype this. It sounds like it was more intensive than you expected. What challenges did you run into when trying to sort of meld this puzzle game mechanic with sort of an action RPG? And also kind of like a visual novel and everything else?
Is at the beginning, just for the cooking, so we knew we wanted it to be like improvisational, creative cooking. Beyond that, we didn't really know what we were doing. And so we would just think about different aspects of what a chef does when they're making something. And we'd say, okay, let's try to make a prototype that captures that feel. And so we do stuff like a purely table management game where there's like a horizontal grid, and all the cookware are certain sizes, all the ingredients are certain sizes, certain widths, and then you can like slice a big dragon thigh in half, and now you've got 2 smaller pieces, so you could like put one back in the pantry and make room for something else. You could bring something else over, you could grind it up to make a filling, and you could put a filling into like a pie or onto a pizza. Or you could grind that up further, and you could get a seasoning, and you could like sprinkle the dragon thigh that you ground up onto something else. And that wasn't fun at all. It was not a fun game, but we liked some of the aspects. Like table management is a sort of important aspect in cooking, and we could capture some of that, like setting up your ingredients before you need them. And so we liked that aspect, and then that happened over and over with trying out a multitude of prototypes. Another one was all about taste and texture profiles, and so we'd work through like, okay, this ingredient has this percentage savory, this percentage sour, and this percentage like salty, and the judge wants a percentage set and a texture set, so we'd have like mushy to crunchy and like 3 more of those, and each ingredient would have those coming in, and then if you fried it or baked it or boiled it, all those values would change in ways unique to that ingredient. And that was getting way too chemistry set.
Yeah.
It wasn't an action game. But I think someone could make a really fun game. It would be closer to like a sports management game instead of like where you're managing ingredients. It was not an action game. But like we would make prototypes and we'd be like, okay, I like this aspect. I like having to manage how much of a given flavor is in there. but it can't be represented by a whole bunch of numbers and bar graphs. So each prototype we'd figure out like, okay, some of these mechanics can work, some of them are just not fun at all.
So how did you settle on the right mix? Like I think a lot of devs would, as more and more creative types like try to mix and mash and sort of meld things together into stuff that is like sort of innovative but still exciting to play. Like how did you settle on what was the right balance?
Just a lot of playtesting, unfortunately. Yep. We also sort of, whenever we were really frustrated with the cooking, we'd hop over to the hunting. And the hunting sort of showed up partially because we felt more confident, like this is a more solved problem. It turns out that if you just take a whole bunch of brawler mechanics and try to make them into a hunting mechanic, it doesn't really make sense. Brawlers are like, you go left to right and murder everything on the screen and you get points. And there's this other motivation in our game where you're trying to get ingredients. You're hunting and not just like killing indiscriminately. And we also have some like ecosystem things, like if you want to get eggs or like you want to get a certain type of plant to fly, then you need to feed it and then get stuff from it that way. But just like that whole system, we felt like, okay, hunting, we need that to be good too, so that we can sort of mesh them together later. And that process took a long time too. Even once we'd established that we could do cooking well, we could have a whole bunch of mechanics, and we actually ended up with too many mechanics from all that prototyping and had to like really spread them out over the whole game. And we felt confident about hunting. Then it's all about figuring out ways where they interact correctly, not just like you kill things for ingredients and then you cook them. And that's where some of the cookware changed. Like ovens are all about passive cooking now, so you can run out, hunt some things, chop out things you don't want, throw it in the oven, and then let that cook and bake while you're out hunting more. And so finding those ways to connect hunting and cooking was really critical to making it feel like we hadn't accidentally made two separate games.
Yeah, something I really appreciate just from watching Brian play and seeing the reception around this is like how this game's design communicates like common ideas about cooking and baking through match 3 puzzle mechanics. So like you mentioned the oven, the idea that like the player is playing this match 3 game to like sort of make ingredients more potent, refine them, simmer them down, but you can use the oven and it'll just sort of passively make everything taste a little bit better as you're out doing other things. I thought that was a small touch that's really ingenious.
Yeah, I think the theme, like, so we designed this game, like I was saying, it wasn't like we wanted to make a match 3 or even a puzzle game, really. Yeah. We were just like, let's make an action game. And so that led us to look for mechanics that would fit that abstraction correctly. And I think the result is something that wouldn't work without the wrapper. So like if you don't have the cooking theme and you have like a pot, a pan, and an oven, or a chopping block, those would not make any sense if you had little like 3 4x4 grids in like a more generic theme like Tetris. It would, and especially if those 3 each had totally different mechanics. The player would just be like, I have no conception, this is unintuitive. But if you put the cooking wrapper on it and introduce it well, then you can suddenly have an intuitive system that has totally separate mechanics in each like puzzle. And I think that was like we didn't really realize that as we were working. And that wasn't our original intention. It took us a long time to realize what we were trying to do and how the puzzle mechanics that we were slowly building up could facilitate and like be enhanced by the cooking theme of the whole game.
Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of like meld of theme and mechanics that seems to have worked out really well in your case. And it's funny, like when you say we set out to make an action game about cooking, like when I think of a cooking game, I think like Cook Serve Delicious, right? I think of a game where you're sort of monitoring things and juggling tasks, but you're not actually like playing a puzzle game to solve. So that's neat. Brian, how's it going in there? I feel like
it's going well.
You've been having some adventures.
I've stumbled into some kind of anime-esque like do jobs to earn coin scenario because I came into town. I did all the anime things like I missed my first day. I spent all my money on my room. Like these are very. I'm like, oh no, I feel like I'm a kid watching Toonami again. This is I think like it's interesting how like there's a tournament setup where it's like, hey, compete with people to like for the actual main gameplay, but then now it's shuffled me into a puzzle sequence for some reason. Tom, I'm going to we're kind of go. There are some questions in the chat, so I do want to ask some of my questions, but Statchy Stat would like to know how you convinced Adult Swim to get on board with this game.
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, we grew alongside Adult Swim games. We originally made 2 mobile games when we first started Trinket, and that's when Adult Swim Games was mainly doing mobile stuff. And I actually contacted them about a little prototype we made after those 2 games, and they were like, "Oh, well, you should have told us about some of these other mobile games, but let's just like keep in touch." And once we started going to events like PAX, we'd see them. We were actually in the PAX 10 at PAX West like 2015 or 20, I don't know, something a long time ago. We were in the PAX 10, and they were just across from us in this basically like little 10 by 10 or 15 by 15 Adult Swim Games booth up on the weird 6th floor that no one goes to. And so we were able to chat with them, and at that time we were like, okay, well, we can put together a 10 by 10 booth. You just have a lot of games crowded in there. But then like at PAX East the next year, we'd see, oh, they've expanded. They have these really nice kiosks that they can just like ship, and then out pops a game and a screen, and we're like, oh, that's a lot better than us like lugging around our giant monitors and computers. And so we just keep talking with them and a few other publishers as well, because originally we were like, we were going to really need marketing help, because we're not designers, but we can sort of wing it, but we're not very good at like really selling a game, and that just takes up a lot of time. And so we just kept talking with publishers over and over at each event and GDC and all that. And eventually it came down to Adult Swim Games was the best fit. But it was just that process of continuing to talk with them. And luckily we weren't desperate thanks to the Kickstarter. We had established that people were interested in the game, but we weren't like immediately running out of money. And so we were able to have a really drawn out negotiation process and getting to know them and all that.
Nice. I was just looking up here on your mobile games, and they're sort of equally vibrant and colorful, but they have what I say was a pretty different and distinct art style. I kind of want to dig into the look of this game, because that is something that caught my eye as soon as it started to make the rounds. It's like this, it's a really gorgeous mix of like Japanese animation and maybe like French like colored pencils or something. I don't know. It's good. I wonder if you can speak to any of the sort of story of how that art style was.
Yeah,
sort of
I can talk to that a little bit. Obviously, that's Eric's realm of expertise, but I think Eric at Wideload and Disney was sort of the character concept art guy, and so his favorite thing to do are all about the characters, and so we started off sort of with a Western influenced anime look, but then at some point we designed and redesigned Mina many times, trying to nail the right feel for a main character. And eventually Eric decided that he just wanted to try to pull off an authentic anime style. And even then we still had a lot more work to do. At one point we ended up going with this sort of watercolor style for the backgrounds to help separate the characters in front of them from the backgrounds, because it's not super important here in the restaurant, but when you go to like the forest or the Skylands or something where you really need to be able to identify what is something that you can eat or hunt, that, especially when you're trying to do it really quickly, that became really important. So we switched a lot of our backgrounds to be more watercolored and pencil lines and a little sketchier, so that they'd be more distinguishable from the like well-lined characters.
Yeah, and definitely the characters and monsters stand out in a way that is very striking. Someone in chat, Level 1 Chef, wants to know what was the process like coming up with all the finished dishes in the game? And to expand upon that, like how did you balance, like, this is going to be weird. How do you balance the values of specific dishes, and how do you design a game to sort of recognize and prioritize like certain combinations? And
it seems like there's kind of a procedural thing going on where the game's able to identify the ingredients you used and then say, this is this dish, which I'm trying to remember what other game that reminds me of. Zelda.
Chef you're
No,
thinking of.
Zelda. Breath of the Wild actually does something similar, where like it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you drop these things in, here's what you made, and like you sort of can try and make a stew, or you can just say, I need health. In that game, you can go like, I need health, so I'm gonna prioritize this thing. If that makes sense.
Most of that is an illusion because there are about 200 recipe dishes in the game,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a lot. So, originally we wanted to have a fully procedural system, and we tried really hard to make this happen, where we'd be like stacking different images on top of each other and like tinting them or like putting pepper on them and stuff. And the conclusion was that from that was that they all looked bad. So then we went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out, okay, how many dishes can we realistically draw? And the answer was we need a pipeline of contractors to try to pull off even 200. So we're going to try to call it around there. So the decisions that go into what the image ends up with once you hit 50 points in a dish is basically just the main ingredient, which is the first one you start with, and then you get particle effects and some other stuff as you get higher and you have a dominant flavor in your dish. But it's surprising because there are a lot of ingredients. There are about 50 ingredients in the game, and so each one can become a dish, and it's also dependent on what chef you're playing as, since each chef has their own cuisine. And so you end up with this huge number, even though we're not like really capturing every single ingredient you put in.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
But to go further into their, I think their question might have been like, how do we even pick those dishes?
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are based on real dishes, but they're sort of fantasy, dragonized versions.
Dragonized.
That was a really painful, or like here the Hydra. That was a really painful process of painstaking, at least, maybe not painful, going through tons of Wikipedia articles about different cuisines, and like my favorite Wikipedia page from that era was just going through the comfort food Wikipedia page, and just trying to figure out what cuisine each character is going to be, and then what are the like really cool dishes, and then do those match up with like the Hydra, or like can we find like a squid-like thing for this other for each monster, and that was like a really painstaking process, but ultimately made us really hungry, so it was all good.
Nice.
Man, yeah, that sounds maddening. I haven't played through all of it yet. Is there a Filipino cuisine analog in this game?
I think...
No pressure if not.
I don't remember. There are about 13, 15, some large number of possible opponents, and each of them have a cuisine as well. So I am not sure. I think there is.
That's okay.
But
I mean,
it would be one of, like, so Mina's got a Chinese cuisine going on. Thrash has Spanish, and his wife has Chilean. And Ziggy, of course, is from the future, from the modern era, so he makes fast food.
Yeah, sure.
Because he's a time-traveling demon possessing a corpse. So we try to like really spread it out.
It's a spoiler, Bryant.
Sorry, that just came in while I was trying to do this, and I was like, "What?"
That scene is very good, by the way. I'm a
We're
big
making
fan
it
of that
hard
scene.
on you.
I don't know how much of Ziggy is a direct celebration of David Bowie, but whatever small amount it is, I am all in favor of it.
Yeah.
So let's go back to like the business end of it, right? Because I still like really, I'm fascinated by how indies succeed in 2017, and I kind of want to know, you made this marketing deal with the publisher, Adult Swim, or rather, you made a deal with them because you said you didn't want to deal with marketing at the end. So let's talk about like what specifically did you get out of that deal, and has it proven worth it now a week or so after release?
So we got some funding, and marketing were our two big things that we're like, oh, we really need that if we're going to keep making this enormous game with 3 people. And really, like, we had over 20 people work on the game, especially artists, because we needed so much help. So those were the two big things, but we hadn't really realized the value of connections for marketing. And like the team over there has been amazing, and so they've been able to be like, I'm gonna personally try to call in a favor to like get you guys on whatever press outlet, or do a press tour, which is something that we would have never considered. if we were by ourselves. But then things like quality assurance, QA is just so critical. And we like the young horses, the Octodad team are just here, and like they did it without really any QA. It was just them playing it, and luckily they did like Steam first, where they could fix bugs really quickly, since Steam doesn't have any of that certification process that slows things down on the consoles. But now we can't imagine doing like releasing a big game, especially on a console, without having like a really good QA team, and that was just so important. And then you get the same thing on the console side. You really need to have not just relationships with like the people at Nintendo, but also being used to those processes and how they go, because I think a lot of players might assume that editing the back end for like the eShop or the Xbox storefront or something is like as easy as editing a Facebook profile. But for whatever reason, a lot of these console manufacturers built these websites back in like the 90s and haven't updated them. So there's all sorts of things that if you're trying to do it the first time, it's going to be incredibly painful. And so it's really, really useful to have someone who's been through it before. And that's another thing that publishers can bring to the table.
Nice. I have so many questions because this character Brian is talking to has the coolest pants. I just think she's the coolest.
Was that Thorn?
Yeah, man.
Alex,
So-
I think there are some questions in the chat. Could you grab
Yeah,
those?
no,
I'm about
well,
to
but
go.
there are so many
all
that I
in.
want to get to, right? So
Yeah.
let's just go in reverse order. So Aspet asks, while we're on the topic of QA, there's an easy question, a fun question. What do you remember being the weirdest or funniest bug that you encountered while playtesting the game?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is, so we have this whole like dialogue system, and you can talk to characters in town, and we also, for whatever reason, we're like really into being able to skip things or run away from dialogue if you want. And so if you challenge someone, you could still like leave. They could say like, oh, I really want, or they'll just like say something threatening, and then you'll be editing your loadout and be like, oh, I want to go buy something else from the shop for this duel. So you can leave. But what would happen if you quit the sort of challenge and you just went off to go somewhere else in town? You'd be stuck in your talking animation, or your talking frame, really. So you would no longer run. You'd just be like sliding in some weird pose. And that the QA team would send us bugs with just like characters sliding around, and that's always hilarious and terrifying.
That's excellent. It's like a moonwalk.
Exactly.
virtual
Like we
moonwalk.
just have moonwalking characters all the time.
Did you keep it in any way? Did you get yourself a mood? Did you go, oh no, that's too funny, and like make someone moonwalk somewhere?
There is a little bit of it at the end due to foolishness. Basically, not all the characters have running animations, so we do a little sliding here and there. A little slide with a fade, try to get away with it. Because animations are time consuming.
So let's talk about art and animation. I want to go back to Statchy Stat wants to know. They like how a lot of these characters all look cool and yet have different body types. They feel like a lot of games tend to sort of default to just one main body type. Now I know Eric is the artist, so he could probably speak best to this, but I want to talk just in general, as you guys are working together. This game has a really diverse and colorful cast, like literally, like there are blue people and green people, and it's great. So I want to talk about like what the thinking was behind that, if there was any, and how you guys sort of came to a happy medium on that.
Yeah, we just really wanted to do a good job of representing a lot of diverse, not just like fantasy races, but also just all sorts of people and sexualities that you see in real life too. Yeah. And I think we sort of had an advantage here that a lot of times games use the same body type because technically it's a little easier for 3D games or even 2D games where you're sort of doing puppetry. Yeah. If everyone is like roughly the same size, so you don't have like arms that are different lengths and resulting in all sorts of bugs. So on the one hand, it's sort of a curse to hand draw every frame of animation for every character, but on the other hand, it gives us that freedom to draw the characters however we want. And so I think that's like a really important trade-off. And if you made that decision that you're going to hand draw everything, you might as well take advantage of that and really draw every shape under the sun.
Yeah, no doubt. Brian, what are you making there?
I don't know. I killed the freaking bowl thing, and now I want to, you
I
know,
just gotta stir it up.
just gotta stir up the
I
bowl,
would
you know.
highly recommend using the green pot next to you
Yeah.
with this dish, and you can match 2 on those greens, and you'll get more points.
But it's a fire-based challenge, so.
Oh yeah, but you can complement the fire with some other flavors, you know.
Oh, okay. So can I move my dish from one thing to another?
Yep, yep.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
There you go, you got it. I just gotta say, I always like the idea of like taste pairings and like appreciating different tasting notes and everything from whiskey to coffee. But even despite years and years of practice, I can't tell the difference ever. This is maybe in the video game it'll be different.
Yes,
No?
so in
Oh.
this pot,
I can do it.
you can stir up the greens. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just need 2 greens instead of match 3.
I just gotta
You get a
drop
lot.
those in, and then do this, and then sorry, I'm just really into this. This is so cool.
No, good. While Bryant cooks away there, let's talk a bit more about how the launch has gone and how it's gone from the business side, because that I think is foremost in most indie teams' minds these days. So like you're out on Switch, you're out on other consoles as well. Can you speak? I understand you don't want to share the actual numbers, but can you speak generally about how the launch on Switch has gone and how it sort of compares to what your expectations were and how it's gone on other consoles, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so we just started with Steam and Switch, and like the reception has been even better. It's like the top of my expectations, but the sales numbers are really interesting because right now we're doing better on Switch than Steam, which is maybe expected since we like had more promotion from Nintendo than Valve, not surprisingly, since Valve doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And we also, unfortunately or fortunately, launched right in the face of Thanksgiving and the autumn sale on Steam. And so it'll be interesting to see over the next few weeks how that changes. But yeah, we've been pleased, but this is really our first launch where we're actually like really seeing every number. And so it's terrifying too. Like everyone says, like, oh, there's a really long tail on Steam and maybe for the consoles too, but no one really knows how the Switch is going to be doing as more and more games show up on it. And then through the holidays when a lot of people get their own new Switches. So I think it's going well, but we're still sort of terrified, and it's not like we had so much marketing and hype that like, oh, we're millionaires or something. It's like, oh no, we're still really, really afraid all the time.
Yeah, and that's good to hear, right? Like, it seems like everyone, indies especially, is having a good time on Switch compared to other marketplaces, and that's always exciting when you see there are so many games in the market and there's so much fierce competition, and you only hope that it lasts, for a while. I wonder. This is like maybe kind of a silly question, but do you think you'll stay with console games for the future? Because you all have a vast array of experience. You started out with mobile. Now you've sort of made your console debut with Trinket. Was this an enjoyable experience? Do you think you'll do it again, or is there something else you'd like to try?
That's a good question. I don't think we have figured that out. Right now, we're sort of focusing on, like, let's make sure that enough people can play this game that we're really proud of, and we can update it and expand on it because we love the characters and the world and the mechanics. But also, we joke all the time about maybe we should make Color Sheep too, because we do miss those days. Like, we made Color Sheep, the initial launch was 2 months worth of work, and then we did an update, and then it was like maybe another month. But those days of like, oh, you could ship a game in 3 months is like amazing.
Yeah.
and so it's hard not to think about that, or like be like really creative and not feel beholden, for better or for worse, to like a really strong concept, because we really felt like, oh, it's hard to say no to things in Battle Chef Brigade because we think the concept is so strong. It's really hard to just be like, maybe we don't need like ovens in the game, or maybe we don't need another biome full of monsters, maybe we don't need all these other characters or story beats. So I think we'd really like to not spend like 2 years prototyping, trying to figure out what the next game is going to be, but it was also really creatively rewarding and fun, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, and when you watch from the outside, you see all the money flowing through the mobile game industry, although certainly it's skewed in a big way, and you sort of like, it's sort of miraculous that anyone would choose to sort of sit down and make a fixed price single player game. I assume this game is single player. Actually, I've never seen any multiplayer, but I assume it's single player only.
Yeah, single players and leaderboards.
Yeah, when there is the promise of so much money to be made in selling microtransaction stuff or online stuff, and so I'm like I'm not sort of fishing or anything there. I just think it's a hard choice. I think for a lot of teams.
I think for better or for worse, we felt like with our mobile games, we don't like ads. We didn't really play mobile games when we made our mobile games, so we were just like, we don't like ads. We're just gonna not have ads. We're gonna sell them for 99 cents, and that's just what we're gonna do. And then same thing here. We're not like, oh, let's try to make it free or have in-app purchases. We're just like, let's just hope that people like our game, and that's probably not like business savvy to the max, but it's just been hard for us to like turn away from. Well, we sort of feel like if we were consumers, we wouldn't want those things, so we don't do them. For better or for worse. And hopefully the games industry. I mean, I'm hoping that with things like the EA backlash over loot boxes or loot crates or whatever they're calling them, I hope that results in more player education about like predatory monetization models, and hopefully we see something similar to. The way like Facebook and Farmville evaporated once people were like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be spending thousands of dollars to click faster. And hopefully we see that the mobile move away from that, and hopefully we see a lot of these big AAA games move away from that. But we'll see.
Yeah, man. It seems crazy right now. But also seems crazy is that breakfast, Bryant. That looks real good.
It looks real good. Tom, oh god, it looks real good. I'm going to do some chat interaction here. That sweet interaction. I just want to give a shout out to Starlight Skies, who runs the game development community on Twitch. Thanks for dropping by, Starlight. We hope we're introducing some fine game developers to your group. There's kind of a talk in chat. They're kind of building on the loot box discussion, which I'm gonna like ramble a bit into a question here. But I'm just gonna point out that part of the loot box discussion is that a loot box isn't just like an RNG thing, it's also about the UX and the compulsion of, opening those boxes. Obviously, like we said, Battle Chef Brigade doesn't have any of that. I wouldn't call this game exploitative by a mile. But I did notice that your match 3 mechanics borrow from some of the UX lessons that like work really well on phones. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how this kind of like positive feeling poppy polish. Alex, what's Rami's word for it? Like, spiced?
Yeah.
Is it spiced? Is it
no,
juice?
Yeah.
Yeah, these kind of
that's
juiced
Rami's
mechanics.
Idea, that's a popular one. Yeah.
Like, obviously, in games like this, they're just part of what makes it fun. It's why it makes you drop the money once you play it. Like, keeps you coming back to see the story. Like, there's a nice mix of ingredients, if you will. I guess we can keep using chef references all day. But like, how do you feel about like seeing like the things that make your game work well also be used in more even like it's weird because like I say nefarious, but Blizzard uses them in all their RNG stuff, and that's debatably better than other RNG stuff. But like, it's the poppy, juicy stuff. Like, if you get my ramble.
I think that making a game juicy is just good for games. It's just making a good experience. I mean, if you end up with something really bland, it's hard for anyone to care about it. So I think we always view it more as like it's a necessary part of game development. You got to polish things. You got to have effects. You got to make it, especially, I guess I should go even further than that and say that some of our mechanics people wouldn't understand without the amount of polish. So you'll notice here, whenever you make a match, there are little stars that fly up and the score goes up.
Yeah.
Before we had that, people didn't understand where the score was coming from. And so like people would just be like, oh, when I put in ingredients, the score goes up. Why is that? Or like if I make a match, the score goes up. And like literally every gem just has a point value. And so when you add ingredients, your score goes up. But it wasn't until we added some more of that polish that we were able to communicate to the player how the scoring system was actually working.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
An excellent point. Nissan 4 You're gonna hate this question, Tom. Sorry. Can they expect a sequel game? Also, did you have any chefs helping you with the dishes? Nissan 4 is a chef, so that's why they're curious about that second part.
Great question. We would love to make a sequel. Right now, we're focusing on updates for the main game and bringing it to more platforms. And we have some sequel-sized things that we want to get to. But we're in the planning stages of that now. Theoretically, we should take a break, but we haven't figured out how to do that yet.
Please don't.
But yeah, we really want to keep exploring this game. I mean, we love it, and the reception's been wonderful, and we just got to hope that sales mirror that. And did we have any chefs? So most of the dishes, or maybe even all of them, are based off of real dishes. So we didn't have chefs helping name them, but they're just like literally some normal, like, say, Chinese dish, and then you like stick dragon into it, or Karana, or one of our fictional monsters.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of good questions in chat, and I hope it keeps coming. But I kind of want to go back and zero in on how you get the perfect blend between mechanics and systems. We talked about this like 20 minutes ago, and it sounded like for the most part it was like a happy accident, right? You kind of like started with an idea, you iterated on it, you prototyped, and then it all kind of came together in a really delectable dish. But like looking back on that now, is there anything you think you wish you would have known going in that would have helped you achieve that quicker or make a better blend faster of different games and mechanics?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, because I don't want our next game to take so long to figure out the core experience.
Yeah.
And I haven't come up with anything good. I think the end result is largely a testament to that goal of making an action cooking game from the beginning. Mm-hmm. But the process felt a lot like we just had to try things and iterate and write down lists of what we liked and didn't like from each one, and try a whole new one, and then gather up all the things we liked and try to mash that into an actual game. So I really wish that we had something like clear, like, oh, if we just did this one thing, each step would have saved so much time. But I really don't think there was something like that. Possibly, I do wonder if, like, so none of it, like I said, with our mobile games, we didn't play mobile games, and none of us are like really into match 3. And I had to like force myself to play the first 100 levels of Candy Crush, just because I was like, maybe there's some insight here. Mm-hmm. And what I ended up determining was that I don't think it would have. I don't think Candy Crush really influenced us, and Candy Crush didn't really like help me design anything. And I did that like basically after we decided that we were using a sort of grid-based flavor puzzle game mechanic. But so I want to say, like, oh, if I just like played more games or researched more about cooking or something, then this all would have been easier. But I actually think that it just like would not have helped, or there wasn't some shortcut that we should have been taking, unfortunately, because I'm terrified of being like, okay, our next game is going to mash up these two things, so it's going to be like 2 years to figure out how to do that.
Did Kickstarter help at all, besides the obvious funding you raised? I know some devs have seen great success from being able to access a community of players relatively early and sort of feed them builds to sort of test and give feedback on, and some not so much.
Yeah, we did a backer demo for people at 1 tier, and that was about 800 people a little over a year ago. And I think that it didn't really influence the game much. It sort of established that we were on the right path. And people were happy with it, and that's always really good. And having to write updates every month was useful in sort of a broad sense of making sure that we were on track and caring about like marketing at the least. But yeah, I don't think that the game design was really influenced by the Kickstarter. Really, the original Kickstarter pitch was so much simpler than the game ended up being. Like, we were going to just be like, oh, there's a tournament bracket, the characters are plug and play, there's barely a story, all the combat will just be, each character will have like 3 moves, the story will be so basic. And and we ended up just expanding on that so much that, if anything, the Kickstarter sort of like forced us to overpromise a little bit, and then realize afterwards where the quality really needed to be put.
That's fascinating. And there is a question that's about to scroll off, and I want to get to it. Starlight Skies just wants to know real quick: do you like any of those cooking mini games you occasionally see in RPGs?
I haven't played anything in like last 2 years.
Yeah. Understandable.
And when we sort of also avoided playing games that had cooking in them, or like watching anime that had to do with cooking, because we really thought there's so much space just like in the cooking arena for all sorts of mechanics. And so we sort of knew that we'd be able to find our own space and didn't want to be influenced and end up doing the same thing as some other cooking game. Or so we sort of avoided that. And like we saw like Breath of the Wild had some cooking going on, and I always felt like a lot of games we know, and we get lots of comments about, like, oh, this reminds me of this mini game and this other game, and it's sort of a side note. And we really wanted cooking to be the star and the thing that's motivating all the other mechanics. And so it was pretty, like, we knew that these other games weren't even trying to do the same thing as us. They weren't trying to be deep about their cooking. It was in service to something other than cooking, whereas we wanted it to be all about cooking. So I do want to like now get back and check out all those other games and see what things we could have totally added and just missed.
Yeah, I think that's a risk sometimes you take as a developer. You're so busy working on your own project, you don't have time to maybe like stay abreast of what's going on.
That's rough.
But in this case, it really worked out because, like I said, I would think of a game like Cooks Are Delicious when I think of a cooking game, and this is so different in such a really fresh way that I think that decision really paid off. Okay, we're caught up on chat, so I get to ask.
You get to ask questions now.
Yeah, I get to ask. How are you feeling as a human being? You just spent like 4.5 years of your life on this. It's out. How does that feel as a person?
Really worried. I before launch, like a couple weeks, I was sort of feeling like, so especially since it's 4 years, it's sort of like you go to your own college graduation, except you don't know if you've graduated until you get up there, and they either give you a diploma, they give you 10 diplomas, one diploma, or no diplomas, and you're like, oh, now I get to learn about whether or not I graduated. And I thought, like, but we don't know how many diplomas we got, because apparently diplomas are like given out slowly after launch. And so there's the process of just waiting for sales numbers. And we sort of knew that from our mobile games, but we hadn't really appreciated how much more stressful it would be now. So right now I'm as a human, exhausted, stressed, anxious, super proud of this game and elated that people are having such a good time. And we've seen so many kind things, and our reviews have been shockingly positive. But all that hasn't really sunk in yet. I still feel a lot of anxiety over making sure that we've got like one user who's Battle Chef Brigade doesn't load on his weird Mac setup, and I'm just like, no, I need you to be happy before I can be happy. And that's a terrible feeling, but yeah. I think that's just the way it is, unfortunately.
I think it was way worse too before Steam did refunds. So now, like back then, like if you were a developer, you sort of like felt this existential dread because you knew somewhere somebody had paid you money and their game wasn't working. So that is always like a hidden cost of putting out a PC game.
Yeah.
Brian, how do you feel about this rhythm? I've been watching you sort of play and hunt and chat and sleep.
It's good. It's
good.
It's a good flow. Sorry, I should. Oh god, you had to ask me that question.
No, you're actually playing a video game.
Throw me back. Throw it back to me when I'm not in the middle of a challenge. Come back.
I think one thing we really like about the Switch is, and that matches up well with the design and the pacing of Battle Chef Brigade, is that the Switch is portable, and you can have like an hour-long play session or like a 10-minute play session. And so we have jobs like here in the restaurant where it's like 2 minutes long, you know. So you can do that while you're on a commute or on the toilet instead of a mobile game. But you can also like sit down with your TV and do a whole duel or do a daily cook-off or something. And being able to play a game that has all these different ways to play and different sort of length of loop is I think, really good and matches up really nicely with the Switch.
Was that a conscious concern during development or a happy accident?
A little bit of both. So a lot of these jobs exist. They're sort of they take parts of a normal cooking duel, and then you just get to focus on one part. Like here, you're just focusing on stirring to make patterns. The Belkir's workshop is all about sort of solving cooking puzzles without needing to hunt, and then Thorn's Hunter's Guild is all about just hunting. And so we got to use those both as like, oh, look, we have so many mechanics, we can spread them out and do a little more and let you focus on one thing. But also, it was super important for being able to teach a game that has so many different mechanics going on and different aspects to it. So we could teach, like Belkir could teach you about sauce without like forcing you into a duel where you have no idea what's going on. And so we ended up needing those sort of small bits to explain the big bits. And so I think it was both a happy accident and sort of necessary in a game where there's a lot to learn.
Did you find yourself cooking more or less while making this game?
Definitely more. We even did some team cooking events early on. And it was really interesting, especially when we were trying to figure out the mechanics of cooking. I'd be like making a recipe and like really thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing why are the shallots being chopped up now instead of at the end? Why am I putting them in the oil, or what kind of oil am I using? And just like how to construct a dish and then how to plate it. And so we'd be like, or managing the counter space, as we talked about earlier, like really thinking through what are the steps and decisions that a chef is going through when they're making something. And then how on earth can we represent that in a game where you can't lick or smell your screen?
Man, I have some questions about that, but actually there's a conversation in chat going on that I think is really interesting and sort of reminds me to double check and ask, like, you've been indie for a while now. What have you learned about the business of running a studio effectively? And what could other devs learn from you about that process?
So I don't know if we're really good at this yet, but
just pretend you are.
I can pretend. We've certainly learned a lot about really the importance of marketing / like picking a game or discovering how to market your game, or picking a concept that is really strong. And so because a lot of game development up to that point, when you're learning to become a game developer, is practicing and becoming competent at making a game. And that takes a really long time just by itself. And that's usually the part of sort of becoming a game developer or becoming a good game developer that people focus on. Because, I mean, honestly, if you work at a 30-person plus studio, you're not the person coming up with the concept and the hook and the marketing. Right. But for an indie studio, that's the really critical next step. You need to not only be able to make a good game, but you need to be making a game that can be sold and can get people excited. And I think that was the biggest, scariest aspect for us. And it's also the one that I think a lot of people just mess up. Like, if you're making a pixel platformer in this day and age, you're competing on quality instead of just on like making an innovative, interesting, exciting game.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right.
Tom, can I get? I would like to get to a couple questions before we go. We're running out of time. We will try and get before we get here. We'll get. If you have questions, drop them in chat. We'll try to grab them. I noticed as I started this game that there's a lot of like characters who talk about game mechanics as though they were natural parts of the world. I forget what other stream Alex we were talking about this with lately, but I just noticed how like that's such an interesting way to mix your narrative design and your mechanical design, is to just sort of treat weird game ideas as though they're things that people deal with. Can you talk about why you did that and how it worked out?
Yeah, that was a really hard decision. Even like going a step further and being like, do the characters get to mention buttons or not?
Yeah.
And for the most part, we avoided talking about buttons, but it was sort of necessary in one of the combat tutorials, and we just gave up basically. But I'd say that we really needed. So in the same way that the cooking system here is an abstraction of real cooking, we needed that abstraction to be normal to the people of the world. Because otherwise, I don't think anything makes any sense. because we need, like I was saying earlier, where you can't taste or smell your screen. We need the player to understand whether or not a dish is good, whether or not they've done a good job, and we also need the computer in the form of the judges to be able to grade that as well. And so the player and the judges, at least, need to be on the same page about what the heck they're talking about. And to some degree, that's a little weird. Like when a judge says, "I want water to be the dominant taste," that's a little weird. And we're like, well, it's sort of like crisp or like ice cream or something. But and like fire and spicy sort of works. But at some point, you just gotta. At least we felt like it was necessary for the judges to just come out and say it, because there's so many mechanics all happening at once anyway that you've got to just have the player and judges on the same page, and that meant all the characters need to have some sort of understanding of what a dish is made up of.
Oh my God!
You got this.
Use your daggers. Daggers and dodge are the key.
That was a big red thing.
I'm gonna work on this. Alex, can you grab any last questions from the chat?
Yeah, let's see. We got some good chat. Starlight Skies wants to know who's talking right now. That's a good question. I never really know either. No, everyone's...
I'm Brian. No, he's referring to me. I'm Brian, and I'm invisible because the only way we can play gameplay through on this setup is to hide my face.
Yes, Gamasutra contributing editor Brian Francis is a gem of a man. He is incredibly good looking, and we just can't afford to put him on stream, or you wouldn't look at the video game. I think we're good. We should probably wrap this up too, because we're supposed to be out of here in about 2 to 3 minutes. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. This game is rad.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I like this game, and I'm gonna be playing a lot more of it myself. I will commence the closing ceremonies as I beat up these animals. Sorry if PETA comes after you, by the way.
They're monsters.
You've been watching. You've been watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel. I have been Brian Francis, the invisible voice inside your head. I've been joined by Alex Waro and Tom Eastman, Tinker Tom on Twitter. Tom, can I just send them to your Twitter if they have game development questions? Should they just find you on Twitter?
Trinket Tom.
At Trinket Tom. So talk to Trinket Tom if you want to know more about this game's development. As for us, if you were to click the follow button on the lower end of the channel, if you were to click that little button, you would get notifications about when we are going live. And so because of that, I'm killing this dragon.
You got this, daggers.
Good luck.
Nice.
There we go. Got him. Okay. If you were to click that button, you would get notifications about when we're going live. And when we go live, we generally go live with developers. Sometimes we play games ourselves. Sometimes we just get everyone from the editorial team on to talk about stuff. But whatever it is, we hope to give you some development insight out of it in some way, shape, or form. So if you make games and you want to know more about the art and business of making games, click the follow button and check out Gamasutra.com. I think it's pretty good. Alex, is Gamasutra good?
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. All right. Good. With that, this has been Battle Chef Brigade. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Always season your monster pots before you cook with them.